Hi there, and welcome to Barry Interesting. I'm Barry Aycock, and as always, I'm glad you've joined us today. On this program, we cover topics that I find interesting, but my ultimate objective is to cover topics that will interest you, the viewer. For our initial pilot episodes, we continue to host discussions with candidates who are currently competing for your vote. Eddy Justice, candidate in the Missouri State Senate District 25, primary being on August 4th, joins us on this episode. Eddy is an active member of the Poplar Bluff community, where he served as an insurance agent for the past 20 years. He's a self-described leader in the Tea Party and MAGA movements, and he's here today to explain why he feels he's deserving of your vote. Eddy, welcome to the show today. Glad to have you.
Thank you for having me.
We've never met officially. It's good to meet you finally. We've had a good time backstage talking about some of the issues that are important to the voters of the 25th District. But first, before we get into the issues, tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, where you live, your career.
Absolutely. My name is Eddy Justice. I am married and have 4 children and 7th grandchild on the way in December. I'm an insurance agent, have been for over 20 years in Poplar Bluff. I've been the president of the Lions Club in Poplar Bluff, as well as the treasurer for the House Republican Campaign Committee for almost 10 years, and have also been the chair of the Republican Party in Butler County, as well as the 8th Congressional District. That's the short version.
Sounds like you're a busy guy.
I enjoy being busy.
When did you first get involved in Republican politics?
Well, it's an interesting story. I was annoying my father one day when I was 4 years old, and he had a friend that was running for state rep. And in order to get me out of the house, he got a pile of his flyers and gave them to me and said, put one on every door and don't come home till you're done.
So you're the free labor.
Yes, I was the free child labor.
As you notice, my son's doing the free labor today.
There you go.
Yeah, so good. It kind of built some stamina and kind of a desire to get involved in politics.
It was it made me interested in what was going on and how we could make a difference. I think what really set me off and got me going down the road toward conservative politics was when I was a sophomore in high school, my biology teacher said, we're going to watch a movie today. And she put the movie in and we watched it. It was called A Silent Scream. And it was a movie on what happens during an abortion. Mm-hmm. And that video touched me so deeply that I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to help protect people who couldn't protect themselves. And that was the real cattle prod that got me moving down the road on conservative politics.
That's going to be one of the issues we get into later, but that's interesting how you got involved. Thank you for sharing that. So, Eddy, are you ready to go into the lion's den?
Let's do it.
You think you're going to be able to handle the tough issues the 25th District's?
I shouldn't be in the race if I can't.
Okay, well, let's go into the lion's den. So, Eddy, the first issue that's near and dear to my heart, the 25th District voters' hearts, is economic development. What plan do you have to bring jobs to this area?
Well, there's a lot of aspects that we're going to have to adjust over the next few years and to address, but a couple that are really important, I think, and they're not in any particular order, but I think we need to work on deregulating a lot of our business community in order to allow business owners to be able to hire more folks and provide more jobs. One of the things that really frustrates me sometimes with regulations is I have a friend who's started a business in his shop, and it's involved chemicals, and the Department of Natural Resources is very involved with making sure he goes by the rules. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to work on the environment and the culture of the relationships we have with the Department of Natural Resources, just as an example, because it seems like they're almost in a gotcha mindset, a policing mindset, and we need to change that to where we can work alongside them in order to benefit the society and our economy, as well as benefit the business owner. Another thing I think we need to take advantage of is a lot of this manufacturing that's coming back to the United States because of our supply line problems we've had with the COVID-19 stuff. And so we need to have a environment in Missouri that will make it more friendly for these manufacturers that are moving back to the United States to want to move to Missouri, and for it to be to their benefit to move to Missouri and to Southeast Missouri.
Well, that rolls right into our next question, workforce development. I've been preaching all along, Democrats and Republicans, they always talk about, developing a workforce, or we need more education, but we're educating and developing a workforce for nothing at the end. There's no job at the end. So we're developing this workforce development. What are we developing this workforce for? Everybody can't work at magnitude 7.
Right. Well, I was talking to a member of the Bricklayers Union in St. Louis the other day, and he said, you know what the median age is of our union members? 57. So what are we going to do when they retire? You know, we are focusing on college for every high school graduate right now. And of course, there are some examples of exceptions, but we really focus on that. And a lot of times when a lot of these graduates would be much better off to be in a trade school, to be taught basic trades, whether it's electrician or HVAC or plumbing or whatever, and we need to focus more people on the importance of trades. And if we're actually training people for trades, then we're actually training people to get in the workforce and to actually be able to get that job at the end of the education.
That's a great point, Eddie. Someone that's looking for a job right now, a plumber, heating and air conditioning, they can make a fortune right here in Southeast Missouri.
Absolutely.
It's hard to get a good plumber, air conditioning, or heating guy anywhere right now. So,
well, if you've got the technical training and you've got the desire to work hard, you can make good money in Southeast Missouri today.
Well, Eddie, let's talk about an issue that's controversial to you, education. We're going to talk about the education formula. I think most citizens of the 25th District don't even know what the education formula is. I couldn't explain it to you today.
Right.
It has to do with the cost of living, student attendance, economic ability of a community. What the heck does that have to do with running a public school?
Well, you know, there's a lot of people say, yes, we funded the formula completely, and no, we didn't, and there's transportation costs and all that, but my frustration with the funding formula is I think it's flawed to begin with. There are schools in St. Louis metro area that are getting $14,000 a year to educate that one student. And the average we get down here for one student is less than $8,000. So you tell me which student is more valuable than the other. Now I understand there's cost of living issues and things like that, but it's not double. It's not close to double. So we need to readdress the funding formula in order to make sure that the schools in the rural areas in the 25th District get the funds that are owed to them in order to educate these kids. I don't understand why, you know, a school in Holcomb, Missouri can they do a half-price education? I don't see it, and I don't think one child in Missouri is worth more than another, and our funding should bear that out.
So I think you make a good point. The education formula, it's not one size fits all like it really is.
There's no one size fits all in medicine, and there's no one size fits all in education.
But the Republican legislature has really fumbled this issue, in my opinion. I mean, they say they fully funded the formula, and the bar keeps moving. They fully funded it here, but no, it's here now. So do you agree with that? The Republican legislature is really, nobody really knows what fully funded means, right? It's according to what number you're talking about that day.
Yeah, and it's all about semantics. It's all about which definition you're using for the word today. But when you're using a flawed system to begin with, everybody gets disserviced.
So that's something you want to look at, actually doing away with the current formula or redoing it where it's fair to
Whether
everybody.
we reform it or whether we replace it, we need to do something because the schools in Southeast Missouri are suffering from it.
So Eddie, I talked to superintendents all over the Southeast Missouri 25th District, friends with a bunch of them. You got Dustin Ferguson at Holcomb, Jimmy Brees at Gideon, Tony Hill in Bloomfield, friends with all of them. I'm sure a lot of them saw the comment that Steve Cooks had made about you the other day about Eddy Justice will destroy public education. With the backdrop of the State Board of Education fiasco that you went through, we don't have to get into the details of that. You can get into details if you want to, but it looked like that Eric Greitens, the governor at the time, was trying to strong arm the Board of Education. And Margie Van Dieven got fired. Governor Parson must have disagreed with that move because he hired her right back as soon as he took office. So can you straighten that out for the voters and the superintendents and the school systems of the 25th District? I know you've answered a lot of questions about it, but there'll be a lot of educators watch this show and they really want to know how you feel about the charter schools and things like that.
Well, first of all, I'll reply to what my opponent said. You know, Steve, bless his heart. He's a nice guy, but he's never discussed this with me, and for him to speak authoritatively on it is kind of not, I would say not even appropriate, but that's his right. I mean, so we'll just leave that where it is. You cannot have a constitutional republic or a democracy without quality public education. I believe that with all of my heart. So why in the world would I destroy public school single-handedly First of all, no single senator can destroy public education. I believe in public education. 3 of my 4 children have gone through public education. All of my school-age grandchildren go through public education. I want Missouri, here's what I want. I want Missouri to keep its promise to our children, which is to provide a quality education to every child, no matter what their zip code, no matter what any demographic, they are promised by the state of Missouri a quality education. And I think if we all work together to accomplish that, it's something we can do. But if we're not willing to try to improve, then we're never going to fulfill those promises to children. Money is important in education. We know that. We've got to fund education. But it's the second largest budget item we have in the state of Missouri. We've got to be striving to improve our results. We have kids in this state right now that test after the 3rd grade in reading, and they're not proficient. So if you don't test proficient after the 3rd grade in reading, the likelihood you're ever going to be proficient is minuscule, and your opportunity to learn and get a good education and get a good job and support your family goes way down. We've got to be striving to get better. And I think that there are ways to do that, but we've got to work together. If one side says, oh, they're talking about trying to make us do better, well, let's do it better because we owe it to these kids. It's not trying to hurt educators. It's not trying to hurt schools. It's trying to get a better product for these kids who we made a promise to and we need to keep. One other thing I want to address, I don't know where it started, but since I've been on the Board of Education, there have been rumors going around that I want to either merge teachers' retirements with state retirement or do away with it altogether. Absolutely false. I believe in keeping promises. The state of Missouri has promised the educators their retirement, and I believe a promise made should be a promise kept, and I'll fight to do so.
Follow-up question on that. Charter schools, it seems like the boogeyman in Southeast Missouri. You're going to be representing teachers, school systems, superintendents, administration in Southeast Missouri, 25th District. Charter schools seems to be like a negative connotation in Southeast Missouri. Do you favor charter schools?
There are a lot of misnomers about what charter schools are. So let's be clear. Charter schools are public education. It's not private education, it is public education. And they're only allowed in the state of Missouri in St. Louis and Kansas City. And they're only allowed on top of that if the local traditional public school is failing. So that narrows it down, way down. Let's look at Southeast Missouri. There may be one school that's failing in Southeast Missouri, maybe. The rest of them are not failing. They're producing, they're getting results. Some better than others, but they're still getting results. So charter schools are just a method to allow children to have an option when their school has failed. Now, if a school is ruled to be failing and you have a child in let's say the 3rd grade, and it takes 4 years to get that school out of the failing grade, that kid's lost 4 years of his education that he can't get back. And that's critical for his future. Why would we give him that disservice? I believe we should put all the options on the table, and if we figure out that one doesn't work, let's take it off the table. We owe that to our kids. We need to be objective, and we need to be willing to look at what is out there so that kids can get the education we promised them. Parents will have options so that their kids don't have to be stuck in a failing school that it doesn't seem to be trying to become a non-failing school. And the future of Missouri's economy will benefit from it in the long run.
But as a senator of the 25th District, is charter schools going to be a big deal to you in the future? Because you said there's one school failing.
I think.
Is it really worth starting the charter school chatter in the 25th District over one school? My opinion, if you really believe in it, the answer would be yes, no child left behind.
Right.
But that one school, the superintendents I talk to, whether it's one school or 10 schools, they tell me that the charter schools that we do have now are failing themselves. So do we send them to one failing school to a failing charter school?
Well, there are quite a few charter schools in St. Louis and Kansas City, and there are some failing schools just like there are in traditional public schools, and there are some really good ones. When I was on the Board of Education, I toured a bunch of them. There were some good ones, but there were some bad ones. That is the responsibility of the State Board of Education to hold them to a standard that will benefit these children. So we can have charter schools if we regulate them correctly and hold them to a standard that to make sure that they're not failing, it works. But I go back to what I said before. Our children are important enough that we should have everything on the table, and if it doesn't work, we take it off. But our focus should be on fulfilling our promise to these children to give them a quality education. And if that's not the motive, then they're in the wrong business.
But since Southeast Missouri really doesn't have any charter schools, the administrators, the school systems, the teachers, they expect their state senator to bring home the bacon to their district. So is that really an important issue? I mean,
well, it becomes an important issue because there's so much writing on it. When there's money involved, people get passionate. When there's kids involved, people get passionate. And this has got both. So there's a lot of passion in this. Whether it is a priority or not, it's still going to be the subject of conversation.
So would you say it was a priority more for you when you were on the Board of Education than it is now, or is it still the same priority?
I don't know if it's any more or less. It's something that I don't believe that charter schools are the answer to our problem, but I believe that they can be used in a way that will benefit our children.
But if you're a superintendent at Dexter, Bernie, Holcomb, Southland, Zenith, they expect you to bring home the bacon, correct?
Right. And that's why I want to relook at the funding formula.
Will that be hard? You'll be one of what? One of 27 if you're elected? How many state senators?
34.
34? You'll be one of 34. It's really going to get diluted. It's really hard to make a change as a state senator or as a U.S. senator because you're one of. So how do you make a difference in the educational system when you've got that idea, but the other 33 got a different idea?
Our founding fathers did not create our system so that you can unilaterally do anything. It forces you to build coalitions of those that care about the same issues and that want to make a difference. And I believe that I can do that.
Wrapping back around to bring this education debate full circle. So whatever the education formula is, and I still don't think hardly anybody in Southeast Missouri knows, you're going to fully fund that formula, correct?
I will fight to make sure that based on the capability of Missouri, and we both know that there's economic tough times ahead, that we will do everything in our power to make sure that we do what's right for the students of Missouri. I can't make the commitment to fully fund because of the COVID stuff and the effect it's had on the budget, but I will do everything in my power to make sure that not only do we deliver the resources needed, but we also deliver those resources with the expectation that the focus of those resources will be on the children of Missouri.
I really think if you're elected senator, we need to come back and somebody needs to explain to the audience what fully funded really means.
Right? Yeah, it may take a little while.
So I'm going to give a little commentary now. Eddie, I'm sure you're going to disagree with me, which is fine. That's part of this show is promoting civility in politics. But an issue that's very near and dear to my heart is Medicaid expansion. 38 states have passed it. I'm going to say this very bluntly. Missouri is one of the 12 big dummies who have not. We've probably lost more rural hospitals in Southeast Missouri than any other part of Missouri, any other part of any other rural area. Red Oklahoma just passed it 2 weeks ago, Medicaid expansion. So it could bring more rural health care to lower income citizens. And I really think it's a winning issue for Republicans, but it seems like for the last 8 to 10 years, Republicans have failed the citizens of Missouri. They should have passed Medicaid expansion a long time ago. It's ironic that Todd Richardson is head of Medicaid in Missouri. I mean, you'd think that would be near and dear to all Republicans' hearts since we got a hometown guy that's head of it. But rural health care is in a crisis because of the COVID epidemic. And like I said in my past shows, we paid that money into the federal government. It's in a mailbox. And just on philosophy, the Republican legislatures, which Eddie, I can't blame that on you. You hadn't been there yet, but I may do it 4 years from now.
Fair enough.
The money's in the mailbox, and our Republican legislature just fails to take that free money out of the mailbox and use it for the health care of the citizens of the 25th District. How ludicrous is that? Eddie, how ludicrous is that? Medicaid expansion. It's a hot button issue. It's going to be on the ballot in August.
Right. One of the frustrating parts about subjects like this is it seems like we've got One side that says it's my way or the highway, and the other side that says it's my way or the highway. But a lot of times the answer is not found on either side. Let me give you an example. So the first year of Medicaid expansion, if it passes, the federal government would pay for 90% of the increase in cost, and the Missouri taxpayer would be responsible for the other 10%. What would happen in the second year?
I don't know.
That's because it's not set. So I think this form of Medicaid expansion is bad for Missouri, and here's why. If you're a pro athlete and you sign a lifetime contract that you cannot get out of, and in that contract it says, I'm going to pay you $100 million in your first year, but every year after that, it's up to the owner of the team, and you cannot get out of the contract.
But Eddie, we can get into those theories. In the second year, we really don't know. I agree with you. But we've got this free money sitting in the mailbox, and Missouri could be utilizing.
But it's a lifetime contract.
But
you cannot get out of it.
Based on what you're saying is a theory. And I can give you a lot of statistics based on theory too. Like most people who are for Medicaid expansion will say it's going to create 64,000 jobs. Well, that's a theory.
Mm-hmm.
Medicaid expansion money is still going to be there in year two, right?
Maybe.
Well, 38 states thinks that it is, correct?
Well, one of those 38 states that I did some research on was responsible for the 10% the first year, and it went up to 20% after two more years. And they have no realization or no understanding of what it's going to do now.
So are you saying 20%?
That the state's responsible for. It went from 10% to 20%, and they don't know where it's going to go.
But I still think that's a bargain if the feds are kicking in 80%, don't you?
Well, what if our debt's called in or interest rates go up and the federal government can't afford to pay more than 50%? Our budget's busted. We can't do it.
But we can't agree. We're talking in maybes, and we really don't know, correct?
Right. I have a degree in economics, and we're talking in economic terms.
Theories.
I understand. Yes. The way that I understand it, the way that I have studied it, I believe it's a bad deal. Now, you have a different opinion, and I understand that, and I respect you for it. But I don't think it's a good deal, and on a philosophical level, I think it's socialism, and that's not what America's about.
So do you think Oklahoma just voted in socialism 2 weeks ago?
Yes, to a point, yes.
Ohio, Idaho, Wyoming, those aren't socialist red
I can't
experiments?
speak to the other states, but I can speak to Oklahoma. I think the ballot language was very poor, and people didn't know what they were getting into.
Well, I hope the people of Missouri read the ballot because it's very clear. Medicaid expansion is good for rural health care. I'm mainly concerned about rural health care.
Right.
The cities have plenty of health care. Kennett Hospital's closed. Oh, that's the 25th district. I think there's 4 hospitals in this immediate area that's closed. I'm going to guess Hayti, Dexter, Sykeston may be on the chopping block in the future if we don't get Medicaid expansion. I know the Chamber of Commerce has flip-flopped on that issue. They think it's a good thing now. They're not really a big Democratic bastion at the Chamber of Commerce, so people are changing their mind on it. You have to admit that.
I agree. I do want to say, though, that the closing hospitals happened because of a lot more issues than just that.
Fair enough.
But
Yes,
that's the only
yes.
caveat.
But that would help. My wife's on the hospital board, Southeast Hospital, and it's a big topic of conversation in many of their meetings. I don't know what
Right.
they talk about otherwise, but it's a big issue in hospitals right now, especially rural hospitals. And I really feel like the Republican Party needs to be more flexible on that because, like I said, we're both talking about theories, what happens year 2, year 3.
Right.
Maybe it's all good.
Right.
You're open to that, right?
I'm open to anything that is going to fix a broken system that is economically sound.
We're going to disagree on that issue, so let's
Fair
move
enough.
on. So let's talk about transportation. And we'll actually talk about infrastructure at the same time. Senator Libla, who I think a lot of, great guy, he's been trying to get this gas tax, 6-cent gas tax passed for many years.
Right.
I'm for that. I know many Republicans on philosophy are against taxes at all costs, but our infrastructure is crumbling in Southeast Missouri. You know, it's based on an agricultural economy. Farmers need good roads. People that go to work every day need good roads. Our bridges aren't in that good a shape. So I was for that gas tax, mainly because we need it here in Southeast Missouri. And on philosophy, many Republicans kind of killed the deal. So I think a Republican can get behind something that's helping everybody, don't you?
Taxes are for infrastructure, partially. And so I don't have a problem with taxes funding our infrastructure, which is our roads. So, I'm against raising taxes, but our taxing in Missouri has to go toward our infrastructure. That's just, nobody else is going to pay for it, so we've got to.
Yeah, do you know any individuals that built a bridge or a road?
Not very big ones. So what we have to do is, I believe we have to go back and first of all listen to the voters. The voters have spoken, and it wasn't unclear on the ballot language. They knew what the vote was. They weren't happy with that tax. So there's two things that you can do to appease the voters and be in a better position to get them to approve it. One, you put a sunset on it, so they know that this is going to happen for just so long. Number two, you dog ear it. You specify exactly where it's going to go and say this is not going to go for anything else. And on top of that, we're not going to take anything away that's already there for that department. And we're just going to put this on top of it. The taxpayers have been duped over and over and over, and they've had enough. That's the way I read it. Now, I also believe that we've got to do away with waste. We've got to do away with abuse and fraud. I remember, I think it was 7 years ago, they did an audit of a government department, and I can still see the headline. It says $7 million missing, and the small print said, and nobody knows where it went. And the next year, that department asked for a tax increase. The voters want to be assured that the fraud is not there, that the waste is not there, and they're fighting against, and that the people that are responsible for that money are fighting against it every day. The next thing I would say on transportation is back to my example about here's one person, here's another, and nobody's willing to budge. We can be creative. We can be different than the way it's always done. We can hopefully be able to find new revenue sources. We can do local partnerships. There's Highway 67 over here was partially funded by one township in Missouri. And then they got money from the Corps of Engineers, they got money from the National Transportation Department, and they 4-laned a highway 70 miles on the taxpayers' approval out of one town. That's an example of some local partnerships that can be used in order to improve our infrastructure. It's not the answer, none of those are silver bullets, but I think there's enough options there, plus maybe come up with some more creative ideas that we can make transportation work in Missouri and have the voters want to be part of it.
Well, my father-in-law works for MoDOT, and I think those people, they're experts on their roads and their bridges. I don't think there's a lot of waste in MoDOT. I think they run pretty lean, and they need to have input into those decisions, I think, because they are the experts on the ground. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Do you feel like there's any, I think MoDOT over the last 10 years has become more efficient, and those workers do a great job in the heat.
Man, I tell you what, I wouldn't want to stand out there all day with that flag and get honked at.
Well, let's get into another issue that's really, really near and dear to my heart because I have trouble with it all the time, rural broadband.
Okay.
We're really lacking in rural broadband here in the 25th District. What's your plans to increase that service?
Broadband has become infrastructure in my estimation.
Yes. Because
it's to the point now that you can't run a business without it. You can't even run farm operations without it, it seems. Any business you go into, my insurance business, whatever, you've got to have it. So the likelihood of it getting done without taxpayer money is probably pretty small. So we've got to find a way to make it happen, find the resources to make it work. And if we do have some private business get involved in it, then so be it. But the one thing that I would always demand is that the last mile is just as important as the first mile. We can't route it to economic centers and stop. Infrastructure, just like our roads, should be provided for every tax-paying member of our society, and I think broadband should be too. I've seen people put in broadband before, and for some reason they went to Jack's house, who gave a big donation to this politician, but it didn't go to John's house, who didn't have the resources to do it. We've got to make sure that when we make it happen, and however we make it happen, that it goes to every single member of the 25th District. And
I'm last on that line right now. We're going to move on to agriculture. I'm going to give a little commentary.
Sure.
I'm sure you're going to disagree, which is fine. Farmers are facing a crisis right now in the 25th District all over the United States. The tariffs that the president has put on agricultural products has been detrimental to the agricultural economy. 25% tariffs on soybeans and all the other commodities. It's the lowest commodity prices in my lifetime. I don't remember Jimmy Carter, I told Eddie before we went on. So Donald Trump is the worst president we've ever had in my lifetime for commodity prices. The farmers have took the brunt of the trade war. For example, farmers are buying grain bins, sheds, tractors, new trucks, and the steel tariffs have really been detrimental to their farming operation. Chemicals, agricultural chemicals come from China. Most of the generics that farmers use come from China. There's even tariffs on that. So everything that a farmer buys is at retail, and everything he sells or she sells is at wholesale. There's no other industry that's buying their product or their inputs at retail and selling it at wholesale. So the farmers are getting it from both sides. They're taking the whole brunt of President Trump's trade war. I think it's unfair. I don't see anything at the end of the rainbow right now for the farmer. Farmers are sticking with the president. I personally don't know why. Maybe Eddie can have some insight into that. But the farmers are taking the brunt of the trade war, and there's no end in sight. I wish he would just declare victory and let's move on. But the commodity prices are at an all-time low. Farmers are struggling. Agriculture is a big part of the 25th Senatorial District. Eddie, I'm sure you don't agree with what I just said, but the facts are lowest commodity prices in my lifetime.
Yeah, it's a tough situation because when you have the trade wars, there really isn't a winner because both sides are being charged the tariffs and they pass that on to customers and the cost of living goes up and it's a tough situation. If you've ever read Donald Trump's book, The Art of the Deal, it is an insight into his negotiation tactics. And you can follow it step by step to how he does it. And he very rarely goes away from it. But he's using those tactics with the Chinese and with these tariffs. And yes, there is short-term pain. I believe in the end, if we stick to our guns, that we will win and it will be better off for everybody in America. That's why I voted for him, is because I believe in him. There were other reasons like Supreme Court judges and things like that, but all that plays in together. You know, agriculture, if you take all of the corn and the soybeans that are grown in Missouri, half of them end up in the mouths of livestock. So not only do we need to have policy that benefits our row crop farmers, but we need policy that benefits our livestock industry. Because our livestock industry, if it grows, our row crop farmers benefit. So those are some of the things that we need to work on, as well as, you know, there's fuel sourcing that comes from corn and from soybeans that we can work with in order to have a boon for the economy of this district. We've got the hemp industry that's very, very new. It's a newborn industry and it's coming on pretty strong. And I think Southeast Missouri's got some of the best soil to grow it in. So I think we're on the cusp of really getting an influx of our economy in Southeast Missouri from that. So there's a lot of things that can be done to improve, and I think it's going to take a team effort, both us and the president. And I'm hoping that those negotiation tactics that I believe in, even though I can't see what's going on behind the scenes, I really believe that in the long run, and hopefully it's in our lifetime, that we will benefit from it.
Well, it probably won't surprise you that in his book, he does talk about using leverage a lot. Mm-hmm. But most of the time when you use leverage in business, you're in business, you sign the front of a check and the back of a check a lot of times.
Right.
When you use leverage, both sides need to come out winners somehow.
Yep.
Even though one has leverage over the other. I don't see a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for the farmer right now. Like I told you before we went on camera, there's going to be a lot of farmers not here when all this prosperity that you speak about happens.
Right.
Record bankruptcies for farmers. It's the lowest of the low I've ever seen for farmers right now. So,
well, here's the option.
I don't think they're going to be here for the prosperity that you speak about.
Here's the option. We could have stayed where we were and suffered more. Or we could try to improve it and try to make it happen faster than it is happening. I don't think where we were is where we needed to be or where we needed to stay with the NAFTA stuff and all of that. I think we're moving in the right direction. And everybody's going to have a disagreement and a difference of opinion, but I truly believe that our president, even though commodity prices are down, I believe he is going to get to where he wants to be. And that will be what's best for America.
I think if you line 10 farmers up in front of you and I, Eddie, and if you ask them if they're better off today than they were 4 years ago, they would be lying if they said they're better off today than they were 4 years ago. Soybeans were $10 to $12, $8 to $9 now, 70 to 80 cent cotton, 52 cent cotton today. So they're supporting him, though. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
They're sticking with him. That's the group that's sticking with him through the thick and thin.
Right.
Why? I don't know. Hopefully you're right. There's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow at the end of this trade war. But the farmer is paying the brunt of it. Let's don't dwell on it anymore.
Okay.
Let's move on to some other issue. Well, I've got another issue, though, on agriculture I want to come back to. I've asked some of your opponents, Mike Parson, Eric Greitens, Jay Nixon, Matt Blunt. They all go on these big trade missions for agriculture. And I know Jay Nixon took a bunch of Republicans to Cuba one time. I've never, ever seen any teeth in any of those trade deals. Are they just for the camera? They look like to me they're just for the camera. They're just for show. You can line those 10 farmers up and say, do you remember that trade deal that Matt Blunt signed back in 2001? I can't name any trade deals that the state of Missouri signed that any farmer in the 25th district has benefited from.
When you asked Mike Parson and the others, did you get an answer?
Well, I haven't talked to Mike Parson about it. But
Okay. But the reason I ask is because I haven't asked those questions, but those are good questions to ask. And it'd be interesting to see what the reaction is, because I agree with you. I have not seen, I haven't read the documents or anything, but I haven't seen any benefit in the 25th district from them.
But following up on that, as our senator from the 25th district, what can you do to shape agriculture in the 25th district?
Well,
you're going to be one of 34, you said.
Right.
And it looks like to me that the state senator does have some local input. We got all this dicamba damage, enlist damage right now since 2016. The State Department of Agriculture has done a poor job of managing that. So what can you do as a state senator to shape ag policy to make it better for the farmers, even in challenging times?
Well, the very first and most important thing that I can do is to listen, and that you can't listen when you're not there. I've only made one campaign promise in this entire campaign, and that was to be a present senator. I will not disappear the day after I get elected and show up when it's time to run for re-election. The only way that I can do what's right for my district is to listen to the farmers in my district. You've got soybeans and the biodiesel stuff. You got corn and the ethanol. There's a lot of issues out there, and for one person to think that they can understand them all is a stretch at best. So the first thing and major thing that I've got to do is listen to the farmers. And as an insurance agent, I've been insuring farms in Southeast Missouri for over 20 years. So I have some relationships already built, and they lead to other relationships. And we'll be able to do the best thing for the farmers in Southeast Missouri because we're going to be listening to the farmers that live here.
So within your clientele at State Farm, then you've got a good sounding board there on some customers then?
Yes, and I stay very close with those customers, and we review their policies on a regular basis, their farm policies on a regular basis, to make sure that the equipment that they have and the liability that they have is going to be served by the policy they have. And by doing that, I go out and tour their farms, and they explain their chemical situations, and I go to cattle ranches, and I've learned a lot from it, and it's very interesting. And besides that, you get to get out of the office and smell the farm.
Farmers are very resilient through good times and bad times. The ag economy is what makes the world go around. It's what buys the new trucks and the new cars and the new everything in Southeast Missouri. So
it's huge in our economy.
Be a very important constituency.
Absolutely.
We'll move on to the abortion issue. Why should a voter care how their state senator feels about the abortion issue? It's a federal issue. So what's your stance on abortion? I'm sure you're not going to come here and tell me you're pro-choice, running in a Republican primary.
No, I'm pro-life 100%, and I told already part of why I have that stance. But I want to take issue with the idea that you say it's a federal issue. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that there are 17 things that the federal government's responsible for. And the 10th Amendment says anything else is the responsibility of the states and the people. And that's why I believe that I can make a huge difference in protecting those that can't protect themselves in the state of Missouri and in the Senate.
Good answer. Let's move on to another social cultural issue here in Southeast Missouri, gay marriage. This is kind of a gotcha question because I know you're 100% in agreement with the president, but you're really not, I'm guessing. 3 days after the election, he was on 60 Minutes as president-elect, and he said that gay marriage was the law of the land. So the president believes in gay marriage. That's a fact. He said it on 60 Minutes 3 days after the election. He didn't talk about it much before the election, but 3 days after, he was Mr. Gay Marriage. That's also a federal issue. It's a federal law, correct? And it was less than 3 years old at the time.
Right.
Roe versus Wade is 1972 or 1973. Gay marriage is less than 5 years old. So I'm guessing that you don't agree with President Trump on the issue of gay marriage.
Well, he didn't, well, I won't go into his intentions. I'll just say what he said is accurate. It is the law of the land. My personal feelings are that I am a born-again Christian. I believe the Bible as it is written and is inerrant word of God. I stand with the Bible in my personal beliefs on that issue and on the rest of the issues in there, hopefully. As far as legal situations, it gets really sticky when we make special exceptions for any group of people in our society because it increases the number of lawsuits. It increases the likelihood of unfair action by government. So we have to be very careful. And it's not just the LGBT community, it's any special group that gets special consideration. We have to look out for the consequences of that. I'm a strong believer in being fair and treating everybody like you want to treat yourself, like you want to be treated. And I think if we would be more specific in our focus on treating people the way we want to be treated, I think we would be in a lot better shape. But that's on a personal level. On a government level, we've got to be careful because when we give special groups special privileges, we damage our ability to treat people fairly.
Just to be clear, you think marriage is between a man and a woman?
Yes, I believe the word means that, and yes, absolutely.
We're going to get off those social, cultural issues then. Managing the state budget. During COVID, it looks like we have falling tax revenues. As a state senator, how can you help manage the state budget, consult with the governor, because it doesn't look good for our state revenues today.
Right.
They're falling every day during COVID.
Yeah, and we've got some tough times ahead of us. There's no doubt about it. And I'll restate what I said earlier just because it's absolutely important. We've got to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. That's got to be a focus. And a lot of times I think when elected officials get to Jefferson City, it's like, yeah, I'll get to that tomorrow. But that's got to be something that we focus on, and now more than ever. Because with the situation with revenues dropping as fast as they are and uncertain times ahead, we've got to be ready to trim the fat. You know, the only way to deal with it is either bring in more money or cut.
Only two ways, isn't there?
Only two ways, unless you got a printing press in the back and can print more money.
Well, let's talk about that. So I know you've kept up with it. Kansas Governor Brownback, when he was in office, tried to save the state into prosperity. Do you think that's a good model? Because it looks like they've really went down the tubes.
As having a background in economics, I can tell you that there are good policies and bad policies on both sides. Taxes, revenues, money, earnings, that's probably the better word for it. Earnings are always used better by the private sector than by government. My money that I make, I truly believe that I can use it better than the government. And that's one of the reasons I believe that additional taxes are always going to be problematic for our economy. When the money goes to the government does not use it as good as the wage earner will use it. Now there's always exceptions, but as a general rule, and that's why you will always see me really digging into taxes before I'll ever even think about it, agreeing with them, is because we've got to make sure that we realize that government is not the answer. Government is usually the problem. The private sector is where the answers are. We need government to run more like the private sector.
Good point. Let's move on to there's one thing I agree with President Trump on, it's criminal justice reform. If it's not a felony now, but it was 20 or 30 years ago, I don't think that person should still be in jail myself. Now, your opponents that I've interviewed, they really differed on that issue.
Right.
One wants to keep them in jail full term. The other one was for letting them out. So if it's I'm making these numbers up, 1
Sure.
gram of marijuana 15 years ago may not have been a felony. I'm making that up.
Understand.
You think they should get out of jail now or serve their full term? How do you feel about criminal justice reform?
I'll answer your question, but I want to say one thing ahead of time. I am a huge supporter of our law enforcement. One of my best friends in Poplar Bluff is chief of police. And they do such a good job and get no reward for it. I mean, they're underpaid. And I think we need to do more as a society. We need to teach our kids to respect the authority of our police officers. And it's a very important issue, and it's something that I think we need to focus on a statewide level and bring attention to it. Now, on your question, I believe, first of all, when you're talking about somebody who did something and then they have a sentence for it.
For example, I remember President Trump let an African-American lady out
Sure.
in Memphis, Tennessee, and I forgot I think it was a very low drug charge for the times we live in.
Right.
But back when she got convicted, it was major.
Well, first of all, we need to reform every bureaucracy we have in the state of Missouri. Every bureaucracy, every department has got some room to improve. So do I believe in reforming our criminal justice system? I believe there is some room for that. I think there are areas like truth in sentencing that we need to work on. I think we need to reform our probation and parole system. I think it's antiquated and it is, quite frankly, failing. And so, yeah, there's room for reform in every area. Am I going to, but the truth in sentencing side, we always have to remember that if somebody gets arrested for something, it's not necessarily what they go to jail for because they plead those deals. So we need to make sure that before we let anybody out of jail, we go find out what the original charge was. Because if we let somebody out on it because it was a small charge and they shouldn't be in jail that much, are we really letting somebody out for something that they should have stayed in for? So we need to make sure we have the truth about what actually happened, and it's not some plea deal that got swept under the table.
I'm going to throw you a softball as a Republican right now,
Okay.
Missouri, under all of our governors, I feel like have been a low tax state. I think businesses that move into Missouri look at us as a low tax state. I think that's one of our positives.
Mm-hmm.
I know most Republicans are against any tax for any reason, so do you agree that Missouri is a low tax state?
Yes.
And what can you do as a state senator to ensure that?
Well, once again, if we're going to bring in manufacturing in Missouri, we've got to have that low tax reputation. And we also have to have a regulatory system that is not overburdensome to these people to come in. I do believe that taxes are a necessary evil because we have to have the infrastructure. But I think we can be more efficient in how we use that tax dollar. And if we police it right to get rid of the fraud and waste, then we can do more with less than other states. And efficiency is something that I think is absolutely important, and I think we need to work harder to make our government efficient. Might be an oxymoron, but it's something that we need to strive for.
No, I've picked up in our conversation, and I agree with it. You're not against all taxes for any reason. Like the gas tax, if it was packaged a little bit differently, it sounds like you might have been for that if it would have been straight for infrastructure.
There would have to be some significant changes in the way it was set up, but infrastructure is a government responsibility, and we cannot drop the ball on infrastructure.
On the last few shows, I've asked the candidates voting rights, access to the voting booth. I've gave the example of Oregon. Mm-hmm. Oregon has had mail-in voting for 25 to 30 years. I actually finally looked it up last week. It was 25 years, I believe. No voter fraud. And they have 75% participation. Isn't it great when everybody votes? Isn't that a patriotic duty of the American citizens?
It's a responsibility, but a lot of people don't take it very seriously.
Donald Trump he's already participated in mail-in voting himself. So do you agree with mail-in voting? I mean, we do it with our absentee balloting. And second question is a follow-up. Do you ever know of any circumstances where there's been any voter fraud in the 25th district?
Okay. I'm willing to listen to any good faith idea that will include more voters, as long as there is a legitimate, proactive way to limit or eliminate fraud. So that opens the door for not only mail-in ballots, but if you got any other creative ideas, let's hear them.
Eddie, I want to get into an issue that's really prevalent during this COVID times, is voting rights and access to the ballot box, voting box. My parents are both semi-disabled, And they've always voted by mail for the last few years. And I think it's really important that we have that option for elderly that can't get out during this period of COVID. Oregon's had this mail-in voting for 25 or 30 years. I just looked it up recently. I was guessing in the past, but I think 25 years Oregon has had mail-in voting. They get 75% participation. Isn't that the patriotic duty of all citizens to vote? And Oregon's getting 75% voter turnout almost in every election that they have. So why are Republicans so against it? And have you ever heard of any voter fraud in Southeast Missouri to do with ballots? And if so, share it with me, because I've never heard of one. I felt like I've kept up with it.
Fortunately, in the state of Missouri, we have a lot of things in place to counter the possibility of fraud. We have a very good clerk system that I know the ones that I know are very, very attentive to it. And so I do not know of any specific case of fraud in Southeast Missouri, but I haven't gone looking for it either. So, and on your Oregon note, you know, we're in Missouri and there's cultural differences all across the country. We're not Oregon. But I truly believe that if you can show me a system, whether it's mail-in or not, that legitimately puts a stop to fraud, then you're going to have me probably be a fan.
Well, that brings me to another question I've asked the other candidates, and I forgot to ask you this. Let's say your constituents are calling Eddy Justice, Senator Justice, and saying, we don't want this mail-in voting, we don't want this mail-in voting, but like let's say you've got disabled parents, whether you do or you don't, but you think it's a good idea. Is there an issue, or is there ever a time in history that you'll say, I know better than my constituents? Is there ever a time that you would do that? Philip Brett, for example, had that decision. It was something to do with public unions for public workers, teachers, social workers. It gave them the opportunity to collectively bargain.
Right.
And he personally thought it was good for them, you know, workers trying to get higher wages. But he overwhelmingly got calls from his constituents, and he actually went ahead and voted with his constituents, but he personally thought it was a bad idea.
Okay. Well, my principles, my core values are not for sale, and I will not budge. But not every policy that is considered in Jeff City is a core principle. Those are things that we can discuss and I can be convinced on. For example, agriculture. There's a lot of issues that are coming up regarding beans and corn and production of and the processing of and the byproducts going to the hog farms, things like that. Those are not principal issues with me. Those are economic issues, and I am absolutely willing to listen to my constituents on those.
Well, that's another point that you just reminded me of. Steve Cookson was on the show the other day, and he said, we really need to work together in the legislature. Well, Republicans really don't have to work together. They have a supermajority in the House. So I personally think that's a bad thing for Republicans right now. I think they've passed a lot of bad laws over the last few years, some good. But how do you feel about the supermajority? I'm sure you want your team to win, but isn't it bad when you get too many of the same, drinking the same Kool-Aid?
As a former treasurer for the House Republican Campaign Committee, and having been the treasurer when we got the supermajority, I'm not going to say that I don't like the supermajority.
I didn't think you would.
However, I think the supermajority is a little overrated because of the fact that there are so many different factions within the Republican Party. We saw it on right to work, we saw it on education, and we've seen it on several different issues. So it all goes back to being able to build coalitions and how good leadership is. If you've got leadership that can help people see the light and get Republicans to work together, then I think we're a whole lot better off. And he's right, Cookson's right. We need everybody to work together, especially when it's the Republicans working together in order to preserve their supermajority.
I've got one last question for you. This is going to be a softball. The gun control issue in Southeast Missouri, the 25th District, where do you stand on that? I think both sides are overblown. I don't think everybody needs to own 300 guns. I do think people have the right to own guns and protect what they have, their house, their family. But I'm kind of in the middle on that issue. I don't feel strongly either way. I'm kind of a neutral gun control guy. So how does Eddy Justice, I know you're a big hunter, You just told me you poked a few wild hogs.
Absolutely.
So how do you stand on that issue? Because that's an important issue in the 25th District.
I'm a big history buff, and I like to know why. So I went back and researched why our founding fathers insisted on the Second Amendment being worded the way it was. And it wasn't to preserve hunting. It wasn't to preserve, having a gun in your home. It was so that the citizens could throw off tyrannical power. Without the Second Amendment, all of the rest of our rights are in jeopardy. I believe in the Second Amendment as it was written, and I believe in the Second Amendment as it was intended. And I will stand for the rights of gun owners every day that I'm in the Senate.
Well said. We'll wrap up with that. Eddie, thank you for being here today. You did a good job in the Lion's Den. I'm sure you thought you were coming into this big liberal bastion and it was going to be a gotcha interview, but you handled it well, good sport about it. And that's what we're trying to promote here in the Lion's Den, and very interesting, is civility in politics. Eddie, I'll give you the last word of the day.
Thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure to be here. I think it is very important for the voters to be able to get to know the candidates that are running for this Senate seat, and to be able to do it however is easy for them, whether it's on TV or on radio. So I appreciate you allowing for this medium. I am running for the Senate because I believe Southeast Missouri needs a voice. It needs a loud voice. I am not a go along to get along kind of officer or senator. I'm the kind of person that says, here's where we stand and here's where we are going to fight. Now, whether that's for the agricultural products that we produce in this district, or whether that's to preserve the rights of the Second Amendment, I believe that the fight is worth fighting, and I will stand until the end to defend your rights and your values in the 25th District. I humbly ask for your vote and look forward to serving you in Jefferson City.
Thank you for coming.
Glad to do it.